Welcome back to the Grant Writing Experts podcast. Today's guest is Courtney Oliphant, founder and CEO of Coastal Nonprofit Consulting. With more than a decade of in-house and consulting experience, Courtney believes that grant success isn't just about writing, it's about smart structures and connecting programs, finance, and leadership. In this episode, she shares how to assess grant readiness, right-size your team, and give grant professionals the tools to become true cross-department translators. You'll also hear about a grant tracker template their team uses to bring clarity and ease to the process. Without further ado, let's get into it. To start the conversation, can you tell us more about you, your work, and how you got started as a grant professional?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Courtney Oliphant, and I'm the founder and CEO of Coastal Nonprofit Consulting, which I started in 2023. And we help nonprofits get funded. It's kind of as simple as that. We help offload grants, we support with contributed revenue funding strategies, and most importantly, we bring clarity and calm to what is often a really stressful fundraising process, I think, for lots of nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
So I got my start in grants when I was working at a small nonprofit about a decade ago. So it's been a little while. But as a part-time 1099 company manager for an arts nonprofit, I saw all of these big dreams and visions of the founding members, but they really needed a full-time person on the ground, a managing director, someone to drive operations and program execution to actually bring those dreams to life, to reality. So I wrote my first grant to fund my salary and became their first full-time employee. So that was kind of my um, dipping in my toe in and then actually getting pushed into the pool of grants and what that world is. So I think what really hooked me was about grant writing was that it turns these early stage ideas into something real. So grants take a seed of a concept and force you to give it lots of structure. So program design, outcomes, budget, evaluation, you have to plan with the precision of if it's actually going to happen tomorrow. So even if you don't win the funding, you walk away with something tangible you could build on. And that was my experience in my early years with grants, which was really exciting for me. So a few years ago, during the pandemic, so 2021, we moved to San Diego for my husband's job at the time, and I made the jump to a larger performing arts organization as their institutional giving manager. So I took off a couple hats that I was wearing as managing director and decided just to hone in on grants. And there was where I really learned how grant programs can scale to generate millions in revenue and saw what grant infrastructure and systems and excellence, I think, look like at, a $38 million organization. It's like a totally different pond than what I was playing in before. And I was like, man, if I could take all the knowledge that you get when you reach this level and bring it to the smaller guys in those smaller ponds, how much transformation could we have in the sector? So in 2023, I started my own company and left that organization and actually continued to consult with them for a while they found my replacement. And it gave me more freedom and flexibility, but it also allowed me to work with lots of nonprofits. And I love what I'm doing now. So it was a great job.
Oh, that's a great arc of where you got now. And what kind of organizations or clients do you primarily support?
So right now we work across sectors. So arts and culture, education, mental health, STEM, those are some of our current clients. And the common thread is that what they're already doing is effective and socially impactful. And they have, passionate teams who are willing to learn and are ready for more ease around fundraising. So a lot of it is we hear about things that we never even knew were a problem and these incredible solutions that nonprofits have in place. And we're like, oh, yes, we have to jump on and support with that mission. So yeah, most of the organizations we work with have annual budgets starting around 500,000. So we have like the small but mighty organizations where the ED is still writing all the grants or they're juggling development with everything else. Others have more robust fundraising departments already, but they need to outsource grants or outsource a strategy because they can't find the right in-house hire or whatever the situation may be that makes it challenging to fill these roles. And that's where we step in.
Yeah, so you're working with organizations that are already grant ready. They already have a grant function.
Yeah, we do some coaching with organizations that aren't grant ready. So we have some resources and tools to help people get there, but we would not, take someone on a retainer before they were ready. It's spending money that they could be putting elsewhere to have an impactful mission. So trying to provide free tools and resources and one-on-one coaching and group coaching and things like that for organizations to get them to that point where they're ready.
Okay, this is great. Well, you have a wealth of experience that we need to dive into. I want to talk about grant team structures. And to start that off, how do you help nonprofits assess their grant capacity needs when you start engaging with a client?
Mhm. Well, first we look at where are they at in their grant journey. So, do they already have an active grant pipeline? Are they managing awards, or are they applying consistently but facing denials? So they have their grant ready, they have all the things, but they're just getting these no's. Or are they brand new to grants altogether and they've not even started on that revenue stream? So if they're newer, we walk them through the grant readiness checklist, like we just talked about. So do they have the program budgets already? Do they have outcomes, storytelling assets? What do their 90s look like? How long have they been a nonprofit? That can be a part of denials as well. So we look at all those things and assess their grant readiness. But for those that aren't new to grants, then we can really dig deeper. So do they have an institutional funding goal for the year, or do they have no idea how to budget for grants? It's a very challenging thing, I think, executive directors face is what do you put in that institutional giving line in your budget? So that's a part of it. And then I think my favorite is the strategic clarity. So what are you actually trying to fund through your grants? Is it program expansion? Is it capacity building? Do you have a vision of a new building 5 years from now and you're trying to build up a base for that of programs? You need support in areas where you have major gaps right now, but it's super impactful work. So what are the most urgent and underfunded needs in your organization right now? That's what we're trying to get to. So then when we actually engage with a client and bring an organization in, we start every grant engagement by building a funding strategy based on all of those strategic needs that we've just determined. And that's where Instrumental comes in. And we build a funding strategy where we review their grant history, current funders, dig into these priority areas. And the result is a really powerful 12 to 18 month roadmap outlining who to pursue when and with what positioning to break it down really simply so that they're not applying reactively, but have a thoughtful, fundable pipeline. And when you have that knowledge of what you're going to pursue when, then you can take a look at all the surrounding pieces. Do you have people on your team that can help execute that, or do you need to bring someone in? It just gives you a lot more information about what's out there and what's possible, and you can look at your goals for what you're actually trying to raise and go from there.
And when you work with your clients, do you primarily their grant writing and research arm, or do they build their own function internally to grow their grant function?
It kind of depends on their budget and where they're at. I guess, yeah, everything comes down to budget because the
Hmm.
the potential for grants sometimes is limitless. You could write 10 grants a month and just going after everything that is aligned. Or you could say, we can only apply for one grant a month, but it's going to be highly aligned, very strategic. We're going to make sure those relationships are in place first. So it's about maximizing your resources. And some organizations are really well positioned for grants where that should be a huge focus, but others maybe they have a narrower window of work that they're doing. And so the grants, maybe there's not as much activity and they would actually have, a little bit less balanced with the donors. Maybe donor revenue is higher than institutional. And in that case, maybe they just need a contract writer to get some grants out the door. So you kind of have to look at what are you willing to invest in grants, and then is that enough to meet the goal that you've set for the year?
So when you think about all your clients and you think back at the different types of clients you have and the stages that they're at, what does a good grant function look like, if that's even the right word, if grant function is the right way to describe it? What is the structure of that team? What should it look like at these organizations, and what do you usually see as they're building it out or they're trying to improve it when they work with you?
I mean, we see it all over the board. I feel like most often we will see a team where they might have had a grant writer like part time, and either that person can't manage the workload themselves, or maybe they're just writing, they're not actually managing, or that person leaves and they have this big hole and the executive director has jumped in and they're doing everything themselves. So usually we don't step into departments that have full teams of grant support. It's usually everyone's pitching in to get through kind of a valley of despair moment, and we're trying to step in and help them in whatever way makes the most sense. So we're assessing in order to kind of assess what they need and how they should structure support. We're looking at like what is the existing infrastructure. So is the executive director still writing every grant? Are they just writing it because there's a vacancy, or are they writing it because there's not enough money to hire a grant writer, or they just haven't had time to hire one yet? Or do they have a team in place and it's about training, or it's about, can some people take on some of this grant work, and it's about, I mean, like the operationalizing, I guess, of a team towards a grant strategy? Or do they really just need to offload everything? They need to bring on someone as a retainer that can take everything off their plate, and they don't have to worry about what's happening with grants other than to review and provide information. So those are kind of
Hmm.
the different ways we might go depending on what their internal structure looks like at the beginning.
Do you have like a checklist in your mind of when you're thinking through the different levels of the grant support that an organization needs? Like, do you have a org chart of what it should look like for a small nonprofit versus a medium versus a large one?
Not really, but it does start with kind of hand in hand what their budget is and what the grant volume and complexity is. So, are they writing just a couple multi-year federal grants per year? Because that's very different than if they have or need a large portfolio of 30 to 50 funders. There's deadlines every month, there's meetings with funders, there's all of this cultivation that surrounds the work. So that's one thing that we would assess. And then the budget is their goal for what they're trying to raise for the year through grants. Does that align with what they're planning to spend for grant support? And so if it's not aligned, then we might be looking at, is there training that can happen? Are there other resources to be able to grow their capacity internally before they bring someone on? Or do they just need to lower that number in the budget because it's not
Hmm.
realistic? So those are kind of the first two things on the checklist.
Yeah. Is there a specific example you have in mind that you can share when a grant writer's role was misaligned in an organization, and what was done to correct that?
Yeah. So I worked with an organization that initially thought that they just needed a grant writer because they had people who were building the budgets. They had program managers that were very involved in the grant process. So they thought they just needed to outsource just the writing. And they had a very minimal amount of writing support. So it very quickly became clear that the issue wasn't just writing, that what they needed was more of a full scope grant management, because they had an ED that was doing a lot of work and she was about to retire. And so there was going to be a gap, and there was currently no process or plan to be able to step in and fix it. So they were, applying to tons of things that maybe they weren't actually aligned for. The program staff, they were scrambling to collect data last minute when we decided to apply for a grant that was 2 weeks out. There was no one system to really manage a grant calendar, get ahead of opportunities or deadlines. So everything was just like flying by the seat of your pants. It was very much reactive mode. And creating a lot of unnecessary stress. So the following year, we suffered through that for a year. The following year, we shifted the approach. So we took on the full responsibility. And when I say we, I see me on my team. We took on the full responsibility for grants. So writing, reporting, management, and started to build systems for data collection, internal deadlines. These are the things that funders are always going to be asking for. So let's make sure that we're tracking those, or we're keeping those in a place where they're easily accessible. And so the result of that was that we just had more ease and clarity and ultimately more capacity. So by putting the right structure in place, we freed up internal staff to focus on their programs and help, just move into more of a strategy mindset instead of reaction. Because I think reaction is where all the stress lives. You're in this period of uncertainty and you get paralyzed. So
When you added that structure for that organization, did it feel like the grant team or the grant professionals had more of a seat at the table when leadership was planning?
yeah, because
Yeah.
then the you moved from like a grant writer getting all the information given to you to someone who's a part of the strategy from the beginning. So this is our goal, what we're trying to raise. These are the things that we are trying to raise money for. And the grant writer is a part of that because we know the funding landscape and we know what funders are looking for. And we can point at that and say, oh, if you added one engagement element to this, it'll be so fundable. Funders will get so excited about this. So it happens at that early design point. So yeah, for sure.
Hmm. And does that change the nature of the work for the grant professional at the organization when it kind of you hit a new, you could say, level, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I mean, it feels good to be heard, but I think there comes an ownership with
Hmm.
that because, grant writing is hard work. And I think people get into it because they enjoy it and they love writing about missions and they love storytelling. But there's also a lot of challenging aspects to it, building budgets, gathering info from people who don't have time to give it to you. So having a seat at the table and being a part of, the impact that you're going to have if you win this grant and having the buy-in, I think that's when you get the grant writers that are really passionate and they're going to, do whatever it takes to get a really strong proposal out the door because of that investment. And grant writers are powerful because we see both the big picture and the minutia of funder requirements. And so, you can ask for, I don't know, it changes how you position a grant and what you can ask for if that grant writer is a part of the conversation. And I think you feel that from that writing side.
Was there a particular moment that made you realize how powerful grant writers can be when they're plugged into the right conversations in that way?
Let's see, a couple years ago, I was pulled into a planning meeting with like leadership team and program managers for a major funder proposal. And the program team had already drafted a basic budget. We were going to go with one of their programs that already existed. So this wasn't inventing something new, but their budget mainly just had teaching time and supplies. No one had read the full RFP yet. I mean, it was 40 pages long. So, to be fair, we don't
Can't
have
blame
time for
them.
that. But there was a lot of work done before even reading the RFP, I guess is my point. So there were even some unallowable costs in there that would have been gotten the application kicked out right away. The project timeline and the goals were really fuzzy. So what was exciting about being a part of it at that point was I got to help them restructure the budget, and we added in allocations for, program management and administrative support and overhead percentage. And I was able to offer insight into recent funding trends with this particular funder and highlight a project that had been previously funded, which sparked new ideas for the program team. So it just led to this ripple effect of creativity and collaboration. And so we had a really strong proposal by the end. And I think that the grant is significantly larger than it would have otherwise because we were able to get a greater portion of the budget supporting their core operations. And it was just a really clear project. It was like, yes, this is what we do. This is the impact. This is how we are going to get there. And, it was approved and we got the grant. So that was really exciting and fun to be a part of the evolution of that.
I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about how you suffered through a year of when the organization was kind of very reactive.
Hmm.
I'd love to double click on how you actually transition out of that because I can imagine someone listening to this conversation would say, yeah, that sounds great, but I'm already stretched thin and I'm being asked way too much. And now I feel like I'm being asked to now step up and do even more. So I'm wondering, how does the grant professional in that context start moving in that direction when when they feel like they're already under so much pressure already from leadership to do more with less?
Well, in that particular case, we were doing the grants entirely. There was no in-house person. And I think that's pretty common that you'll have no one who is dedicated to doing grants. I think if anything, we stepped in and we offloaded from people like the program managers, other types of roles so that they didn't have
Hmm.
to do as much heavy lifting with the grants, but there wasn't an internal person that we were relieving. I would say in the cases where we have stepped in and there has been a team in place, the best thing that you can give someone coming in from the outside is a strategy and templates and tools that they didn't have to build. So
Hmm.
that's how we've worked to try and make the grant writer's life easier by saying, okay, the executive director has approved all of these grants, so you know for the next year what you're going after. Here's a tracker. Here's how you
Hmm.
answer these questions when the board has a question about why didn't this grant come in. Here's a template response. Like we help a lot with kind of the training and tools to help increase someone's capacity without increasing their time. If anything, they should be spending less time once they have some of these things in place.
And what does the impact of that have when they have everything at the high level of the strategy all the way down to the tactics and the tools to manage the day to day? Like, is there a team that then operates around all of that infrastructure, or is it just the one person feels like they have clarity around what they need to do every day to hit their goals?
Yeah, I think generally it's the one person, but it's in collaboration with, possibly an assistant, possibly another grant writer, and then definitely the director of philanthropy. So at the large organizations, they might have a whole grant writing team, but most, probably 90% of nonprofits either have one grant writer who's working very closely with the ED, or there's two. So the
Hmm.
teams usually are not large, but it does help with this communication and helping create autonomy for a grant writer too, because I think there's so much time that has to be spent around making decisions for grants that if you can do that up front, then it's just a breeze when you get in and you get to actually write and work. You're not having to stop and pause and ask, all of these questions. Can we do this? Should we ask for this? Should we apply with this program? Because that trust is already there and you've already determined the priorities. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that would be incredibly helpful when you have no idea what you're doing and then you have all these tools handed to you and a roadmap and everything, and all you really just have to do is execute. For teams that already have an existing plan or they have a way of working, even if it's not the best way, do you ever run into friction when you're trying to introduce these new strategies or new tools where the team has kind of been doing it in a certain way for a long time and you're introducing a new way? Is there friction in the transition, or is it usually like they want this and that's why you're there?
Yeah, I found that most people are like, "Oh, yes, thank you for the tools." But also, I love improving my own systems. So if I walk into an organization, and actually this just happened yesterday, we met with a client and she showed me inside of her Google Drive and it was organized in the same way that I organized mine, so that was awesome. But then she went into her version of a grant tracker and I was like, "Oh, I love that you were tracking it in this way and that you did this and I'm actually going to steal that." So I'm constantly, to ways that other people have solved some of these problems, and that my tools are like a launching off point for what's going to work best for you. So I have things built out both in Drive and Google Drive and in Microsoft. And just you have to be flexible because nonprofits are dealing not only with what's free and affordable, but who the people internally, the skills that they bring. So if someone comes into an organization and they have never worked in Google before, it's going to be easier for them to stay with Microsoft, and to build up everything in Microsoft. And so we just have to be adaptable, I think, as grant writers to be able to use any kind of platform. And I've found the frustration with that, but I would never impose my systems on someone else because they're the ones that have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis.
How do you work with grant professionals when they need to start building the acumen of working more cross-functionally with like the finance team and the program team, and they have to be more cross-functional and start acting as collaborators? What advice do you give to grant professionals when they're trying to move in that direction and start pulling those levers?
Yeah, let's see. I wrote down some high-level bullet points.
You have a checklist, it sounds like.
I'm looking for it. What section are we in? Or what step?
Maybe step five? Second question? It's my fault.
Okay,
I'm
got it.
jumping
I
all over
found
the
it.
place based
No, no,
on the
no, it's
things you
okay.
say.
It's okay. I just don't want to ramble. So
Rambling is good though, because you'll have all the like if you have checklists and templates and just your 10-step process for XYZ thing, that's the stuff that people love to have.
yeah, I need to get a lot of this stuff out of my head. Yeah, okay. So things to be more effective for cross-functional collaborators. So one thing that I did early on that I would highly recommend to everyone is ask to sit in on program and finance meetings. So you don't need to say a word. You're not there to say anything, but you are starting to understand the language and building up trust with those people and just hearing the day to day, what's going on and what their pain points are and what are they struggling with so that, it might be that you still don't understand necessarily what they're talking about, but you know that a huge audit is coming up and you're not going to ask for anything last minute. It's even things like that that I think help. And to, don't be afraid to say, can you help me understand how this number was calculated when you're requesting information? Can you please break this down for me so that I don't have to bother with you this next time and I can look at the audit myself or something like that. There's also lots of webinars and classes on how to read budgets and audits and 990s, and I think those are essential. You have to be able to read those pieces because every single funder will ask for those, and you need to know if there's any explanation that's needed. And I think over time, you're able to translate that information into like what the funder needs. So at some point, and I don't know, it was probably 2 or 3 years in of me doing this, just sitting in and learning and asking questions, that I was able to be the one to turn raw numbers into a narrative or to help build a budget from what the organization is using into a funder budget. So, you just stay curious. I think the best grant writers are the ones who are asking smart questions and are friendly and are trying to connect the dots, but sometimes fail. And I find that people are really receptive and want to help you grow and learn.
Hmm. So just be friendly and become their best friend for a while.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it takes.
Yeah. Switching gears a bit, is there like a myth or a misunderstanding in your line of work around grant capacity or just grant the collaborative work and the responsibilities grant professionals need to have to be good at their jobs that you wish you could correct?
Yeah, I think one is just around the term grant capacity. I think people associate grant capacity with having someone to write grants. But I think that real grant capacity means that you have the internal systems, clarity, and ways of collaborating to consistently pursue and manage funding. So it's more about the process and having a strong process. That's going to build your capacity. That's going to mean that you can fly through grant applications, that you have language libraries that you can pull from, you know exactly how you're going to position something because you know that funder. Like that, I think, is true grant capacity, not just
Hmm.
can we spin out 100 grants in a year and more grants equals more capacity is definitely the second part of that myth, I think.
So grant capacity isn't just hiring a grant writer, it's having a process in place.
Yeah, exactly.
When you get to the point, sorry, let me rephrase this. When is an organization at the point where they should be hiring a grant writer or a grant team?
I think it comes down to when are people so maxed out that you are actually going to raise more money if you hire someone to do your grants. Like if the executive director is spending 10 hours a week writing grants when she could be spending 10 hours meeting with donors and having lunches and doing that work, then you're actually losing money because your director is spending their time writing grants that have a 20% chance of being funded. So I think
Hmm.
there's a moment there where you have to look at how valuable is your time with different tasks. And same with the team. You might have a development person who is splitting between grants and annual campaign or something like that. And either it's a skill set thing where their skills are stronger in other areas, or they will be able to raise more money in a different revenue stream if that other part is relieved from them. So that's what I would say is the key moment.
I know you're a consultant, so you might be a little biased in answering this, but how do you answer the question people say, should I hire a grant consultant, bring someone in externally, or hire someone internally?
So I think it depends on the capacity because in a lot of ways, hiring a consultant as a like a fractional grant manager, so we're talking full scope, they're going to do everything and offload it off your plate, is cheaper than hiring a full-time grant writer for probably, I'm not going to say better quality, but you're getting a team, you're getting expertise, you're getting relationships because they're working with lots of organizations. So I think there's a different, just a different skill set that you're getting when you do that, and it's usually cheaper. I think where it's tricky is when you can't afford a full-time grant writer and you're looking, maybe you have $20,000 for the year. It might not be your best bet to go with a consultant that has that's charges more for if you only need a couple grants a year, maybe if you can find a part-time grant writer. I think the challenge is finding the part-time grant writer because as soon as you have someone who's part-time, you as the executive director or the director of development, whoever it is, you're managing that person. So you're making sure that the work is getting done. That person might be sick, they might have vacation. There's all this stuff that comes with having an employee versus if you use a consultant, if they're good, you don't have to worry that the work is getting done, because they're driving everything themselves and they're independently moving things forward. So if you want to have a grant writer that's in-house because you want to mentor, you want them to eventually step into a full-time role, you want to invest in a person and are willing to do that management work that comes along with it to make sure the grants are getting done and submitted properly and all that, then, I would go, try and hire a grant writer. So it just depends. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard question. I don't think it's always the right path to go with a consultant, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is always a it depends kind of answer. Talking about capacity and grant capacity and executive directors, what's something you wish every ED knew about building grant capacity? I'm
Just
hitting
have
you
to
with the
pick one.
curveballs.
No, this was on here, but I was not sure how to answer. I think that building grant capacity is about building organizational capacity. So it lifts everything. It's not just fundraising. When you build grant capacity, it means that you have clear priorities, your budgets are in line and make sense and are clear. Your outcomes are really well defined and you know how to track them. You have systems for collaboration. So it kind of goes back to that idea that, when you hire a grant writer or a grant consultant, grant professional, that you're just hiring someone to write and send off your grants. You're really not. You're bringing someone in to manage processes, to manage relationships, to strengthen a pipeline of funding, to strengthen program design. Like there's so much that a grant writer does beyond just that ROI of the grant awards that are coming in the door. So when you're building capacity, grant capacity, it is directly serving your organization and your organizational capacity. I think that's what I would say. Because I get a lot of EDs coming to me with board members saying, like, you hired this person 6 months ago and we still don't have grants in, and trying to calculate the ROI and justify the grant writer's position. And it hurts my heart every time because I'm like, a grant writer is doing so much more than just directly trying to get funding in the door through writing grants. There's so much value in having that person on your team. Even if the grants don't come in, there's so much value in having to do the work that it takes to really get things prepared and ready for a grant to be
Hmm.
something to be fundable. So,
Have you do you have an experience in mind when you had to deal with that when they were assessing the ROI based on like the narrow lens of
oh
that, and
yeah,
how did you
every
deal with it?
day, every day. It probably comes up, um, even with our retainer clients that we've been working with for years. It comes up, every couple months. We're at a board meeting and they're like, I need to go back and I need to show, X, Y, and Z progress and what we're doing and how many things are in the pipeline because the board member wants to justify what we're paying you. And every time I have to come up with the same response. Like, we are following a strategy. We are applying for 2.5 times what we think we're going to get. We're building really strong budgets and program design and, all of this stuff. So you have to look at it more holistically. We are not just writing grants. If I left and you didn't have anyone doing this work, the organization would suffer, not just get a reduction in funding. The overall infrastructure would sag. Yeah.
It's a good answer. Reveal that it's very
Uh,
short-term thinking.
it is. It is. Yeah.
You mentioned, this is me double clicking on one thing you said. You mentioned you apply for 2.5 times what you expect you'll get. Is that a rule of thumb that you've learned over time, or is that an industry standard that you've adopted? How did you come to that number?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I came to that number because I was getting the question over and over again of like, what is your win rate? How many grants do you win? And my response was always, I don't track that. I don't think it's a valuable metric. There's so many different reasons why a grant gets funded and why it doesn't. And that should not be the responsibility of one grant writer to hold on to that as what defines their success. So that's a whole nother rant. But I was saying instead, like, this is how much we raise. And I realized that we need to go deeper than that. Like, more than just this is how much we're raising in a year. What is our actual goal? And what do we need to actually hit that goal? So I started doing, research into, what percentage of grants get funded on, and especially our local funders for this particular client that started all this. And I realized that we really needed to be applying for 2.5 to 5 times what we need to bring in the door in order to try and hit that number. And this helped with their budgeting process because it meant that if they had $250,000 in institutional funding, and maybe a couple of those are rollovers from the previous year, and we know that money is coming in, but the majority of it we're going after, we do not know, it's uncertain, then I know that my budget needs to be, well, of course, I can't do the math. That was a hard number to do the math on. But maybe we need to go after 400,000, 500,000 in grant asks in order to try and hit that 250. And that's where that builds your strategy out. So then you know if your pipeline is robust enough to even hit your goals. And then you can see going even a deeper layer than that. Okay, I'm going to have to apply for all 35 of these grants, which means I'm going to need someone to help me and at this level of support. So it makes it really clear what you need when you
Hmm.
break it down like that.
Hmm. So it sounds like whenever you're entering an engagement with a client, you're always looking at the year and what do you need for the
Hmm.
year and working back from
Yep, the
that,
fiscal
not
year. Hmm.
let's look at this funder and what do we need to do to get this particular grant from this particular funder. Um,
Yes, exactly.
is
Yeah, I
and
never thought of
I'm
it
not
that way, but yeah.
okay. Well, I'm not a grant writer, so tell me if I'm missing the mark here. But it sounds like from the conversations I've had with other grant writers, you can get stuck in a mindset of just every, like it's the next grant and the next grant and the next grant. It's just, it's like you said earlier, it's all very reactive. If someone's an in-house grant professional and they're fielding requests from their board who said they know this, they heard about this grant and they think they should go after it. And now suddenly it's on their plate along with all the other things. And they feel like they're on this hamster wheel of just being very reactive.
Hmm.
How do they get to the point where they're at a position where they're thinking about and doing the work the way you're describing the way you do your work? How do they go from, you could say, like level one to level two?
That's a great question. I think the way that I do my process, and I think that this could apply to literally any organization, is in that Q3 before the end of the fiscal year. That's when you are jumping into instrumental and you are doing all of your research. You are going hard, verifying things for next year. You're reasserting that you're still aligned for certain opportunities that you normally are applying for. You do all that work in like a condensed period of time. Find a week. Like for me, I know that I never have grant deadlines for whatever reason the first 2 weeks in March. So that's when I do all of my prospecting and do my funding strategy for the next fiscal year. And then I have that funding strategy that I take to the ED and I say, okay, so now we need to come up with our go, no go list. What are the things that if they come across our plate as a surprise, how are we going to know whether to say yes? So it'll be things like if it's under $10,000, we're just not going to apply. We can put it on the list and look at it for next year to incorporate, but we're not going to jump on it. If it's over 10,000, it's worth a conversation to dig in deeper. And so there's different things. If it's less than 3 weeks out, so you could set an urgency timeline. If we learn about a grant that's due in a week, no matter how amazing it sounds, we're not going to apply for
No
it.
chance.
We're going to
Yeah.
put it on the dock for next year. Sometimes there's exceptions, but I think if you have that and that's a clear conversation you have with your leadership team, then they know how you're advising and it's very clear how you can stay ahead of some of those things because we're always forwarded emails from like board members and oh, do this grant, I just saw this, it's due in 3 days, and just being
Hmm.
able to say, actually, we've assessed this and because it's not XYZ, it doesn't fit into these categories, we're going to table it for next year. Thank you so much for sharing, this is a great opportunity. You know what I mean? So it's just you have to navigate those things, but at least if you have a checklist or a plan, it's easier to handle it.
Hmm. This is really good advice. I feel like you've been through the ringer enough that you know how to handle these situations.
Yeah.
So this is great. You have a lot of great advice. I'm cognizant of time because I know we're going over, so I'm stealing more than I think I asked of you.
Oh, no
But
worries.
to end it off, I'd love to ask if people want to learn more about you, connect with you and your work, where can they go?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn most actively. We don't have an Instagram. I'm trying to just stay focused on the one platform. Advice to all consultants, just pick one platform. But then we also have a Substack that kind of feeds into that content. So Beyond the Ask is the name of our Substack. And we have one segment that's grants and one that's donors. And then you can find us on coastalnonprofit.com as our website. And we answer all of our emails within 48 hours is our goal. So you can always reach out that way as well.
And then very last question is you talked about systems and infrastructure and templates. Is there a template that you have that would be really helpful, or templates or systems that you would give to grant professionals that are in that space of trying to move kind of what I was saying from level one to level two? Is there like a
Mhm.
template that you would recommend? I know you mentioned the go, no go, and you have your tracker templates, but is there one or two templates that come to mind where you're like, if I'm a grant professional trying to move to this new place, this is absolutely what I would
Mhm.
give to them?
Yeah. So we do have a link that I could send you. We have a grant tracker that
Hmm.
we've turned into kind of a freebie. And it's a spreadsheet. It tracks all of your grants, but kind of the magic of it is that you have to put in your ask amounts for the year. You have to put in what you think is actually going to come in and when you think it might be awarded, like those kinds of things. And then it rolls up into a summary sheet so that you can go to your ED and say, our ask amounts for the year are 275,000. You're telling me we have a 300,000 goal. We're not going to hit it because we're not even applying for enough money.
Mm,
And that tracker just becomes where we live and we track everything in it. It's the Bible. We update it on, where we're at in the process, but then it also feeds into the bigger conversations of, cash flow and budgeting and those things that a lot of times grant writers get asked and we have no idea. Like we weren't a part of building their organizational budget, but we're responsible for getting to that goal. So I think there needs to be a little bit more ownership and tools to support grant writers to be able to answer those questions. So that's what we built.
that'd be a very helpful tool. I would love to be able to share that with the folks in our audience as well. Thank you so much, Courtney. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Good questions.
Thank you. All right, let me stop.